All right. So you've just been tapped to run marketing for a company that just raised its first private equity round. How do you strike the right balance between growing for the future while still ensuring immediate pipeline ROI? Kurt Uhlir is going to help us answer that. Kurt is CMO of Easy Home Search, a board member of CEO NetWeavers, a frequent public speaker, and an all-around nice guy. As a globally recognized marketing expert, he's known for rapidly growing organizations of all types, from startups, turnarounds, and IPOs to Fortune 500 companies. Welcome to High Intent, where we explore unfiltered lessons from the front lines of modern marketing. I'm your host, Justin Rubner. Let's do this. So in 2021, venture capital hit some record highs with COVID and technology. And over the years, that funding has dried up due to interest rates, economic uncertainty, and in my opinion, overinvesting in tech during the COVID years. Last year, it started to increase. And this year, we had a lot of venture funding buoyed by AI, no less. However, I will say that the number of deals has actually decreased because the deals are bigger. In addition, PE-backed layoffs have increased and PE bankruptcies as well. So any of us, including Kurt, my guest, will tell you working at a PE-backed company is a different animal. Your revenue expectations are off the charts. So Kurt, number one, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And number two, if you were the CEO or the CRO of a PE-backed company and you had a viable product and a company to turn around, who would be the first two marketing hires that you would bring on your team?
Oh, my first two hires. From a marketing perspective and even a CRO perspective, the CEO, the first hires I'm going to bring on is I'm going to make sure that the CEO, I'm going to make sure that the head of product is the right person. Because even though you may have a viable product, it's very rare for me to find that the product can just sit. And so they have to have a head of product that's worthwhile. And the next role for me, if I was the CEO, is going to be the chief marketing officer over anything on the sales side. And we can talk about that. If I'm in that CRO role, CMO role, my first two hires today, or the ones I'm going to start reshuffling if there's already a team, is going to be number one today because of AI, a senior editor. I mean, I'm talking somebody to 10 to 15 years of writing and advanced expertise, but a senior editor with AI depth. I mean, they've got to have a depth of experience extracting internal expertise, for me, preferably from multiple industries, to be able to translate that into stuff that's going to be success. And the number two is going to be a hybrid designer. So somebody who probably was a full-time designer, but decided they didn't want to do that. And they started morphing into things either in their role or their extracurricular activities into marketing automation and maybe even some writing themselves. Because there's a lot you can design with AI, but still, like yesterday, I wasted like 2 hours for trying to get the AI to do something that if I had a designer sitting next to me would have been done in 15 minutes. And so I just think that whoever I'm hiring, tools are easy to buy, but judgment is not. And with things changing, I need trusted judgment.
Yeah. So if you were a CEO, you would hire a CMO?
I would hire a CMO, and especially whether it's a later stage venture company or especially into private equity. When you look at the data, so like there's still, you mentioned a lot of PE bankruptcies. There's a lot of PE firms that are still running outdated playbooks. But it's like if you look at the data from McKinsey or anyone, when marketing reports to the head of sales, revenue starts to tank very quickly. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I have seen when you have a head of sales and marketing that was formerly a head of marketing and you have a strong sales leader underneath there, that can be a winning combination. But it is almost 100% fail rate when compared to what could have been or competitors. When you look at a head of sales, you have a hunter and you put marketing underneath that person, sales will start to decrease at least 12 months out, if not sooner.
Yeah. Obviously, as a marketer, I agree with that. Do you consider CRO sales?
I do. I think so much of titles for me depends on really the meaning behind things. Titles are, to some degree, you can call me a dog catcher. There's so much now with where things are going, even at like a company that's onto their third or fourth private equity fund, because usually we have different levels that each company will go through. It matters much more about contribution. You should have a head of sales, a head of product, a head of marketing that could step in actually to some of those other roles. Like as a head of marketing, I can play a product officer in a lot of meetings. I'm on 20 plus patents, but don't give me a full product team to lead. I sometimes will have some single product managers or engineers reporting to me because I do enterprise SEO, but that's different than running the whole product. Likewise, I want a head of product who could step into a sales call and close the deal as well. And so you have to have that cross capabilities. And so to some degree, I think it does matter who the people are behind there. And then really, what are you expecting them to take the lead on? But you should want those people to contribute in all of those areas. Otherwise, that's where things go sideways.
Let's talk about the fail rate that you just mentioned when marketing reports to sales. What have you seen with, you said it's 100%?
It's almost 100%, especially now when you start to look at things, you start to see, and I say fail rate, it's not that the companies will completely fail, but revenues will start to decrease. Or there'll be opportunities where you see maybe the company did continue to grow by 25 or even 50% year over year, but their competitors just moved way past of them. Even if it's an established industry, you'll see that growth from competitors happen. It's the difference in the thinking, and there's nothing wrong with it. Salespeople are focused on closing deals,
Immediate revenue, immediate closes.
immediate revenue. I'm the rare CMO that will actually fight for customer success. We can continue to fight about like the renewal rate and who owns that actual dollar figure. I'm happy to own that from a P&L perspective, but I find that even there, when customer success, the larger the company gets, continues to sit underneath sales, which often it does if it's not pulled out by itself or moved into marketing in my case, you will see revenue, both referrals start to decrease, and you'll see growth from existing customers start to decrease and churn increase because there's a different feel for it. Like if you're a really good sales leader, you want the next deal. There's nothing wrong with that. I want the next deal, but not as much as a good sales leader does. And so like customer success, I go, well, customer success is about making them immaculately successful so that they have to tell their friends about you. Well, sales often doesn't feel like that because they moved on to the next relationship. As the marketer, I want the data. I want to know who's actually using what parts of the product. That's the best raw information I have for are we actually solving the need that we have versus perceptions. Yeah, so from a CRO perspective, that's why things start to fail at that point compared to competitors. So in some cases, you also look at it as just lost capital. Like there are a lot of cases, if you go back and you do the case studies, when a company actually goes bankrupt or they don't hit their numbers, it is because they started to make that shift and they thought they could just move marketing underneath a strong sales leader.
Yeah. It makes sense. You're, as a marketer, if you're reporting to sales, the tendency is to be chasing your tail every day. You're in the weeds of leads and not in long-term sustainability, brand, etc.
Yeah, it's also the frameworks that we build in. I mean, sales should be thinking about, I mean, outside sales, they are developing relationships. Sometimes, especially on big enterprise deals, those might be 18 to 36-month closes even, but they're still thinking in terms of sales. For me, I would think a strong marketer should always come in and actually discuss the budget the same way that the head of product should be, whether it's a CTO or a CPO. And they should be coming in and saying, like, I will come in day one and say, before we discuss like the details, we need to take our whole budget and to split it into three buckets: 3 to 12 month revenue, 12 to 36-month revenue, and 36-month revenue plus. And meaning with that, not that we won't be able to track things and we can talk about that. I push the CFO and the CEO and the board to be comfortable with investing in 36 months plus. I say, imagine that you get $0 returned on your investment into that third bucket for 36 months and 1 day. We will get to discussions about making sure that we're making wise discussions and pivoting as we need to. But those three budgets are the first thing. That's how you approach product from even at the PE stage. Like, hey, you may still be looking at a flip or you may be looking at a category conversion, but you're still looking at how do you just split that product investment in those areas. That's how marketing approaches. By the nature of sales, sales is focused on that first bucket. Now, if you force them into that discussion, they can have an intelligent, wise discussion and actually help the acceleration for the momentum in those later two-stage temporal buckets. But they're going to live in the 3 to 12 month budget themselves.
And I totally agree with you about the first two hires after that marketing head. Maybe a CMO might be a little too senior for some young companies, but definitely a seasoned marketing executive who could see the whole picture,
Yep.
a senior content person who knows how to tell stories and knows how to edit, knows how to use AI, knows how to write, use video storytelling,
Yep.
and a designer. I also agree with that. And I think it's kind of rare, but designers are just so important. It's so difficult to produce content without designer if you're having to outsource that all the time.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I think about a designer is like what makes a good CMO today is somebody or a head of marketing, to your point, is somebody who has a full stack approach. And part of it is they might not have actually even been a marketer for too long because like they may have come from another industry. Like I see a lot of times good head of marketing at VC and at private equity backed companies, they were a lawyer before, but decided they wanted to be a lawyer. They were a software architect that decided they didn't want to be a software architect, but they were people that were trained in thinking in terms of systems.
Mhm.
And so it's because of workflows today that makes them a really good head of marketing. That's why that second hire for me is somebody who was a designer. They're really good at making things look polished and taking a lot of information and make it concise. But I also meant they didn't want to be a designer too much longer. It's like, and it's not just because they can build infographics, it's because in terms of AI and automations and workflows, I can train people on that even if I need to at a PE-backed company, but I can't teach you how to think in terms of here's a huge 36-page document that I need turned into an infographic. Well, that's what a good designer can do. But then to be able to take a podcast, an interview, a webinar, and turn it into, 12 different content categories with completely different ways and audiences, how you do that. Like that's a systems approach, a workflow approach that a good designer just has in their brain. They have it in their soul.
Yeah, totally. So lately, I've been talking with CROs, CEOs, investors, and I guess it's not surprising, but the assumption and what they're talking about is that marketing is the last hire. Let's talk about that. Do you agree with that?
It depends. And I'd say the reason it depends is especially in the private equity world or later stage venture, there's always a return window for most funds. Now, there are some PE firms that act a little bit more like family offices. So if they find a winner, they'll run with it. But usually, like they need to start returning money in like a 5 to 7 year window. Well, so if the fund is already 3 or 4 years into it, then they are likely investing in companies where they're expecting a pretty quick return on investment, or they're jumping into something that's a burning ship that they just want to get shored up and stop sinking so that they can flip it. In that case, you might need more traditional marketer that could sit under that CRO. But if you're looking for growth, if it's an early stage of the fund, there's no way you're going to get that if you're placing necessarily your head of sales up front. You may need some good sales leaders, but that's different than your head of sales. You need that marketer to come in and be able to start talking in terms of the temporal phases that we spoke about so that you can have conversations about momentum and revenue building. And if you wait till later on that, or God forbid, you start hiring the marketing team and then you bring on the head of marketing that's going to lead them, whether they're CMO or, VP or something like that. That's a recipe that, yeah, old style private equity groups used to use. And it's outdated when you look at the returns.
Well, plus the marketing leader comes in and the team that they have may not fit their vision.
Right. Yeah. It does completely depend on the time frame of the people behind there and the vision of the CEO as well. Those 2 do have to line up as well. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have a 2-year flip for a company. There's also nothing wrong with the approach that says, "Hey, we've got a 25 million a year ARR company. We want to take it to 50 in 2 years and sell it." But if the category starts to open up and this could really become a $500 million business, we'll hold on to it and our limited partners are okay with that. But the private equity fund has to be open with that because the worst thing that'll happen is they hire, whether they wait on the head of marketing, they bring him in up front or the salesperson, and they tell them one thing, and then they get 18 months down the line and they go, I mean, you're not hitting what I'm expecting. And then they bring in the other scenario. Like you can't just pivot that quickly.
Yeah. All right. So you're the CMO of a company that was a startup and it just received a massive round of capital and they've restructured the team and you're the first marketing hire as the CMO. Outside of team building, what would be the first one or two strategic projects that you would want to oversee?
Yeah, great question. The first thing I'm really going to want to look at and do is a full evaluation and usually reevaluation, because the funds would have done this, that the groups would have done this themselves. I'm going to start with the full competitive alignment.
Mhm.
And this can happen very quickly, but not just what the private equity fund thought that they were investing into, but what do the competitors think? And I mentioned that because like I was brought in by a family office into a company that they thought that they were selling prop tech. Like that's what they fought about it over and over. And one of the large investors was a very wealthy individual that had invested alongside the family office and was also a customer. And so we're now 6 months down the line from it, and he's arguing at a board meeting with me that is like, "It's prop tech." And I was like, "Really? You've got like 50 customers on this thing. Like, why are you using it?" And he's like, "Well, we're using to build our websites. It's an IDX provider, but more than that." And he's like, "We're for the listings on real estate websites that consumers search for." And he was like, "And we're sending out listing alerts and there's email automation." And he's naming off these things. And I was like, "Okay, so all of that in any other industry is called marketing." He was like, "Well, yeah." And I was like, "And every other tool you mentioned to it comes into marketing." And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "And you're paying for it out of your company's marketing and sales budget." And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "You don't have a budget for prop tech." And he was like, "No." I was like, "Prop tech exists. There's management products and these things that happen, and analytics." And I was like, "You invested and you didn't realize it. You wrote $1 million check into a marketing technology company for real estate." And literally in that meeting, he was like, "Holy shit. Like, you're right." And so that board meeting shifted, and we started to shift then, like, the conversations became easier because they realized it was marketing technology, even though everybody that had wrote checks for prop tech. And so there was nothing wrong with how they came in, but we grew that company massively and ended up with sale to a mid-market company, mainly because of the shift at everybody at the table, not just mine, because when I looked at it, I was like, I am asking you these questions because I went and looked at the budgets of everybody who's become a customer, all of the partners that have come on board. And they basically all told me without saying it that it was marketing technology.
Sure.
And so that competition thing is the first bit. The second thing is I'm going to start a really deep content approach for things. And most people kind of, and maybe we should probably talk more about this, but like for me, I joke to say most marketers are just salespeople that are scared to make phone calls. And so if you look at the where they spend their time and their money, they spend money on paid media or over the last 10 or 15 years, you could make a lot of money writing really horrible, thin, top of funnel content that would pixel somebody and then just browbeat them until they would take a sales call with ads. And it's like, okay, I've never done that. I write deep content, usually starting deep in the funnel or for people in customer success that talks about real pains, things that you're not using in a product. It says, hey, our other customers are really successful using a third of the product you've never even touched, and write that as a difficult piece of content. That's the content that large language models love today. And so I'm going to start very quickly outlining content that's going to be much deeper the funnel that most marketers are not capable of writing. And that's where we're going to start doing stuff initially. And that's the reason, like, I've always outperformed other marketing teams, but that's what large language models love today.
Let's talk a little bit more about the competitive angle you mentioned as your first project. We're obviously talking being aware of competitors, of the product, of the differentiation and all that. But let's delve a little bit more into how you would do the competitive research and how it would be actionable.
Yeah, great question. I think if you look at any industry, let's just look at marketing technology, and you look at like the map of what these infographics look like for all these pieces. Within your industry, within marketing technology in that example, we've all made these little camps of things that says like this is ABM, where there's 27 different flavors of ABM with circles within an ABM. And it's like we all believe that's competition. But if you go to the customers, the people that are making decisions, and you look at that big marketing technology map, that's not how they view the world, because in their mind, they have much fewer budget lines, and they're also budgeting their time, knowing that they have to invest where they spend time. And so you may have a great email automation tool if you're in marketing technology. So your competition is not just that. It's whatever else your customers would be choosing to spend their money or time on instead of your product. So you may be the best at your little tight, like, competition market, and you may have won that SWOT analysis that got you the funding round, but that's not your true competition. There might be 12 different things that you're actually competing with for time, much less budget with your actual customers. That's what competitive analysis looks like. And not just to win the sale, but to keep the sale. And so many B2B companies, especially, like, you win the sale and you're really good, and you wonder why your churn is horrendous
Yeah.
because you sold hopes and dreams, Your onboarding was horrible. And so you never won the mind share in the customer. And it wasn't because your product was bad. It wasn't because your onboarding was bad. It may have actually been that those were nailed, but your marketing might have been sideways up front that set a bad expectation. So onboarding never could have delivered. And so that's why I care about what competition looks like, not just to win the deal, but especially for the people that have churned as a customer in the last 12 to 24 months. Why did they choose to not renew? Did they go to a true direct competitor, or did they change to something that you might not have considered a competitor, but help them find growth or solve a different pain? They may just say, hey, the pain that I wrote you a $100,000 check for last year is not nearly as important as what I can spend $50,000 on or $200,000 on to solve a bigger pain. And so that's what competition looks like.
At my last company, there was a new category that was produced right before I got on, and top of funnel, kind of that shallow content. What is X? What is Y? It performed really well at first, but as you would imagine, as the category matured, that content no longer performed, and buyers were looking for deeper, more personalized content that was a little more complex and savvy. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I think there is a space for that super top of funnel content in a new category, but if you have a defined category, who's going to read that shallow? So you may get people to your website, but they're not staying.
Right. That thin top of funnel content, even in a new category, is so much easier to produce with AI now, which is why I want to have that advanced editor.
Yeah, so it's around more. There's more of it
Yeah.
because of AI. Yeah.
And when I produce that top of funnel content in a new category, if we're redefining the category, it's now you actually have to be able to not just have the what used to be the top of the content, but I want to map that into starting take them into the deeper questions they should be asking next, which traditional top of funnel content never did. But I want to lead them very easily into, well, just like YouTube. Here's the next video you should be watching. Here's the next video you should be watching. I want my top of funnel content, especially in a new category, to do that. And so you have to have scripted out where to take that. And it's actually not even just like the content you create, like it's also why the old playbook would have said at private equity companies, hire a head of marketing, hire a head of sales from the same industry that's been in the same role for the last 10 to 15 years. That outperforms and brings in more risk now because those people traditionally either are not curious about what's changing with their customers, or they have so many hidden assumptions they're not asking the questions that somebody who's been successful in two or three or four different industries, or coming from somewhere else like journalism like you have, or I mentioned like law or somewhere, that would come in and say, I want to ask Fresh the why. Even if we're doing $100 million a year in revenue, I want to ask the why, because often it takes that curiosity, that approach from a different industry, and somebody who's knowledgeable to explain those hidden assumptions that you go, that thing that you just said that you thought doesn't pay attention, that's going to take us from being the fifth largest to into one of the top two, top three category leaders.
Let's talk a little bit about content. This is kind of your second step. Would you still be investing in this deeper form content, even if you don't have your story straight?
Yes, for a few reasons. One is if you're later stage venture backed or private equity backed, you have enough of the story to expect to come in with a large amount of deep lower funnel content, renewal content, and including to tell the source, the case studies of your current successful customers, but in a way that doesn't feel like a case study, but instead makes the individual, not just the company, sound, their company sound like the superhero. If you've been the decision maker and I write a superhero story that makes you sound great, I can almost guarantee that you will share it on LinkedIn and maybe even email it out to people. Like I'm going to start that deep funnel content right away. But to your point about if you don't have that story fully figured out, starting way down deep where most marketers are not only are they not interested in it, they're not capable of having the deep level product conversations. That actually makes it easier to back up to the rest of the content to me, because by getting to sitting down with a product manager, not even like the head of product, but sitting down with a product manager and asking them some of those deep questions about what are they struggling with today? Why did what they building matter? You're going to uncover all of these questions that actually build the storyline out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. It doesn't have to be a linear, and and it shouldn't be a linear approach. It's not like develop your story, do the content. You could be doing these things in tandem.
Yeah, I've done fractional CMO work for 2 stints in my life. Even then, most fractional CMOs are bad at the approach because they just kind of want to get a 6 or 12-month agreement, or they go month to month. And I'm like, well, no, the first thing, in my opinion, even in that case, should be let's do like a 45 to 60 day, leave you with like what needs to be implemented over the next 12 months with a large amount of that content stuff figured out as a recipe to go and follow, so that if they don't want to work with you, they're fractional. Like the company still has stuff to go and implement and run with. I think if you step in as a full-time head of marketing, the first thing that I should be doing is building that while we're starting to actually, in that case, you've hired me. I know that I'm here for the next 18 months, usually on average. And so I can start actually getting some distance on the bus while we're building the bus. And so it's going to help me create that plan a lot sooner. And plus, you get the product people on your team a lot more. You get the head of sales on your team a lot more when you go back and go, look, I spoke to 3 customers who churned, not to sell them, but this is what I figured out. And you go back to the head of sales and you go, and by the way, here's some new stuff that's coming out very quickly.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, that's going to help me close deals.
Okay. Let's talk about lead generation versus demand generation. I know you have some strong views on this. Let's talk about what marketing teams and the C-suite get wrong about this.
Yeah, especially now. If you go ask most marketers or most boards, you ask them what demand generation is, that what comes out of their mouth is actually leads.
Leads.
And so part of the problem with that is the outdated playbook of who sits on boards. They typically bring in industry relevant people, or a lot of times somebody, an investor. What they often don't have a lot of times is they don't have a true CMO that, or retired CMO on their board to be able to ask questions. And so they bring in some people who were great sales leaders before, or who wrote big checks. And so what they're thinking in terms of, hey, I'm getting somebody to fill out a contact form, basically.
Yeah.
Or I'm building out like who's all the decision makers in there. And that's lead gen. So lead generation captures demand, and demand generation creates it. And so, it's one of the problems where most marketers, and it could be one of the reasons that I like people to lead marketing that were not marketers traditionally, and I think that they perform the best, is because we don't speak like marketers. And so I think we need to be bilingual. I need to speak CFO as much as I do CMO. Like, brand is a meaningless term to a CFO.
Yeah.
But yet I've gone to people at mid-market companies where I've been the head of marketing and said, hey, here's my $5 million budget I'm wanting for enterprise SEO. And at the end of my talk, the CFO goes, let me think about it. And they come back the next day and go, you've got your 5, I'm giving you an extra million, and we'll talk about it in 90 days if you're going to get another 1 to 2 million. That doesn't happen because I come to them and say, it's not brand, it's about trust. And so the data says, from Forrester, McKinsey, Gartner, says, if you're not one of the top 3 brands, largest competitors really in that industry, you've lost somewhere between 60 and 80% of the deals at the end of the day. Because from a risk aversion perspective, your customers, especially in B2B, are always going to choose number 1, number 2, or number 3, because they don't want to bring in a bad egg from a vendor perspective.
Should we never mention the word brand to CFOs and CEOs and CROs?
Potentially no, but only if you explain what it means. For me, I'm always going to start in terms of, I want to make sure that somebody who, if I'm in the CRM space, which I'm in the CRM space right now, we just launched a subsidiary in the CRM space. And it's like, I'm not Salesforce, I'm not Pipedrive. And it's like, I'm not Monday.com who's come into the CRM space. It's like, well, I've already lost, in that case, probably 90% of the deals. No, like, brand at that point isn't the thing. The thing is, here's why we do things different. Here's what you're trying to solve. Here's why you've changed in that example case. Here's why you've changed CRMs every 24 to 48 months at your small mid-sized business. And you want to talk to the customers in that terms. So in that case, I'm coming to them and I'm talking to my CFO on the board about, it's not brand. It's about trust. It's about pointing out why they keep changing the product that they have here. And it's making them realize that says they're going to stay on that roller coaster unless they talk to our company.
Yeah.
So is it trust? Is it making them aware of things different? It's changing the perception, and then getting the especially the board level to say, and I'm not just talking about like, hey, getting, like a radio or, TV ads. Like, we can talk about things in terms of leading indicators that let's agree up front when we talk about brand or trust that we will know that we're actually on the good path and we're making wise investments.
Well, we're marketers, we're communicators, and we need to put on our different filters depending on who we're talking to within the company.
Absolutely. I think it's also one of those reasons that at the senior level, so whether it's a head of marketing, a CMO, or any other, place within the organization, you have to have a peer group that is not just peers, but is cross-functional people. And so like in Atlanta, I've been part of helping reinvigorate an organization I built 20 years ago called CEO NetWeavers. Like it's all senior level people that, and some of them retired, but they don't want to retire. So we call them encore members. They want to come hang back out with, those of us that are still operators. But it's like I can go at this point then to people that it's not a mastermind. I'm not paying to be part of something, but it's just like, hey, here's what I'm struggling with. Or I had my board meeting and I presented my budget and I got these questions and I feel like I'm not connecting with them. And I can kind of put that out. You have to have a group, whether it's formal like my organization or that you've created where you can go to a friend that's a head of product or a CFO or two friends that are CMOs and say, hey, when I give you this presentation, when I show you this, why am I not getting budget? And they can give you back raw feedback that's not going to jeopardize your job, but will fundamentally change your job.
Yeah.
On the other side, they're going to come to you for things that says, I keep hearing this, but we tend to stay in our own lanes and therefore we don't actually pick up the language from other people.
Right. Really good point. KPIs. I've learned long ago that brand is kind of a dirty word when you're talking with folks not in marketing. And I separate my KPIs and metrics out by leading and lagging.
Mhm.
And generally speaking, one is revenue and pipeline, and the other one is all the fun brand stuff. What are the top, if you were coming in to a PD back company again in this scenario where they're rebuilding and they got the viable product, what would be the KPIs that you would focus on? Because you can't do everything.
Right. You can't do everything. So the first thing is I'm going to split my KPIs into that temporal stages we mentioned about the 2 to 12 months, 12 to 36 months, 36 months plus. And we're going to agree upon it upfront. And that's actually, I think the hidden part underneath what you just asked for me is, and why most marketers fail is they wait till they start reporting. And so if you're now 9 months, 12 months down the line and you're changing the KPIs you're tracking, it's a big problem because especially if you haven't set up that temporal framework, anything that you come up, unless you've just happened to have over delivered at everything from the expectations you didn't get, anything that you start coming up with that you're showing as indicators is going to feel like basically you're trying to save your job. And as marketers, there's a lot of analytics. And so we can make almost any campaign look great.
Or
And
yeah, or
so,
you could just report on the good stuff, and it can change every month or quarter when you report.
right. I love your both leading and lagging indicators. And I'm also going to separate some things like lagging indicators. I'm going to separate that into attribution related and contribution related. And I say that in terms of, attribution is who clicked last. Like Google has made billions of dollars at this point, taking credit for people that were going to sign up to a contact form and or make a purchase later that were going to do it anyways. I know that. I step into companies and I shut off $200,000 of ads and nothing changes over the next 30 to 60 days. And I'm like, yep, we just saved you money that you were lighting on fire. Contribution, on the other hand, says, look, we can come back in. It's harder to do, but after the deal's signed, we can go back and it's much more doing surveys like we do in true research or we do in journalism to ask questions about what led to that decision. You need to agree to that up front. And so I'm going to split into that a lot more because it may matter that they listen to a podcast or they watch 17 YouTube videos and then they click the ad. It wasn't the ad. It was the 17 YouTube videos and two shorts that they watched that drove that. And so you can pull that out, but you have to go back and do research through your customer base and not just hammer them day one to uncover that. But there's a lot of things on the leading indicators. I want to track not just branded search fit, but especially in LLMs now, you have to really track in from the large language models, the Google Analytics traffic that's bringing things through. Because what people don't realize, so this is one of the hidden things for anybody who's not in marketing, almost every single AI visibility tool out there is just complete vaporware. And even where it reports something back, like Surfer SEO just came out with this massive report where they went through and they went to go test asking the same questions through the APIs to ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude, and then they went to go ask it as a user, and the results are completely different. And so a lot of the AI visibility tools are just vaporware. And even those that aren't, they're using the API, which doesn't show what real users are doing. But you can set up things in Google Analytics to start to separate out the traffic that's coming from the large language models. And then you can go back as users to start doing much more canary in the coal mine tests to see where you all are surfacing on there.
Let's just get a little more specific here. I like your temporal model. What would be the top KPIs that you would actually and metrics that you would report on outside of revenue and pipeline?
Yeah, I definitely care about, the traditional speed to lead, speed to meeting setups. That's going to be much more of my short-term stuff.
The time it took for someone to click on an ad or a piece of content to the time they got a conversation with a salesperson.
But yeah, to the time they had a conversation, to the time that they moved into different stages of the funnel, to the time that they closed. For me, one of the first things that I start tracking, and I will track it day one, and I'm amazed at how many companies don't track this, is actually referral rate from current customers. And so from day one in all those stages, because marketing can influence that, sales influences it, customer success influences it, and so that gets into the contribution things that I'm tracking. At the end of the day, we all want to see referral rate from customers going up.
Kirk, how do you get sales reps to enter that stuff into Salesforce?
From the referral rate perspective, I don't believe that they're going to enter it in. So AI may help with that a little bit. And so if your customer success team does not have accounts in and cannot enter stuff into current customer accounts in Salesforce, you have a flawed and broken system. If sales is not allowing customer success, especially if it's a separate organization, to add stuff into your CRM like that, that's a problem because you might find out day one, but as part of onboarding, maybe somebody says, "Oh yeah, well, I found out, that Justin introduced me to your company years ago." It may also come up 12 months later or 18 months later when it comes up in a conversation, at which point you want to document it, have it added in, and then it goes back and starts to create that story that actually happened about reality. You might not find it out day one. And so it's actually more likely to find out. On the other hand, how do I get referrals? Well, you can also influence that to the point we were talking about making content that makes the customer at the user or the decision maker, the superhero, when they expose something that good happened, your customer success person or support person, because sometimes those are different, needs to ask for a testimony of that point or can we ask for 15 minutes to ask some questions so that we could write a piece highlighting you. And then you release that content and then you push it out in ways that it's ghostwritten for that person. You've now influenced the referral. All of that is easily trackable. And I would actually say at that point, marketing might write that material. Customer success or support may have teed it up. And if support will not allow us to enter that referral happened or that content was posted into the CRM, I'm not going to say that company because it's a broken system.
So speed to lead, customer referrals, anything else?
If I'm able to get budget, which hopefully I am, but especially if we're looking at that longer time frame, I'm going to start from a leading indicator perspective. One of the core things is impressions in Google Search Console. And I say that just because as a marketer, it's one of the few things that you cannot fake. And also, you're never going to rank number 1, 2, or 3 for a term until you've ranked 37th and 97th. And so Google will start to show that to you and you can track that over time. And most marketers never show it because boards go, I mean, I don't care if we're 97th, but that's because we're not talking the same language. And so I'm going to track that. I'm going to start tracking brand search volume, both in Google Trends, but I'm also going to track it in large language models. There are things I'm going to start to look at that for in social. I'm really big on social mentions and social signals. Like I'm at a company that competes with Zillow Group. Like I said, we have a CRM that's launched now. We have a whole bunch of enrichment tools and other subsidiaries on there. I can go look on any piece of either B2C content or B2B content, and I can see that we've driven somewhere between tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of social signals, other people that are not us sharing each one of those pieces of content on Twitter, on TikTok, on YouTube. They're mentioning it on LinkedIn. Those are social signals I can't fake, and I'm not the one that's sharing it. So that starts to show that it's not just that I have expanded my reach from a sphere of influence, but we have shared content or encouraged it in a way that other people are actually spreading that word. I'd rather them share a case study then I wouldn't mention my brand, because the case study is more valuable to me than just mentioning my company's brand.
Yeah. Let's get into the blueprint to wrap this up. High level here. Let's make you a VP of marketing and you're reporting to the CEO of a PE backed company. What would be your high level blueprint to get started here?
I'm going to step in right away to have that conversation and to force the conversation. I'm going to have individual conversations with all of the heads of all the heads of the organizations and every board member, if the CEO will let me. That they won't always let me that, but on what they think those percentages should be for that temporal investment that I mentioned. And I want to have them individual, and I'm going to anonymize them, and I'm going to share them with everybody. And I'm going to let them know that ahead of time. Even if there's not alignment, simply sharing that anonymous information fundamentally changes the conversations that take place in the company. We're going to have that. We're going to start the content discussion we had. And then, even if everybody thinks we shouldn't be having the longer term discussions, I'm going to start forcing the discussion on the, maybe not 36 months, but 24-month plus momentum builder building, because I'm stepping in as somebody that's different than most marketers. Most marketers are going to step in, they're fear driven and they don't have curiosity. Most CMOs expect to be replaced every 18 to 24 months.
Yes, they do.
And so, hey, CEOs and board members, you should hear this and go, they expect to be let go in 18, 24 months, either because they were really successful and they helped you hit the number, you flipped the company, and therefore the next funder is changing out 3 to 5 different C-level positions, or well, they just missed what expectations that they didn't set ahead of time and they know they're going to be out. So they're doing everything out of fear. And I'm like, that might happen, but it's not going to happen because I'm not trying. And then I'm not really trying to shoot for real growth here. And so I don't care about optimizing for survival. I care about optimizing for the outcomes. So we're going to agree about the outcomes. And I'm going to really start to dig in with the sales team. The second thing that I do for building that framework is I'm going to take at least 30 to 50 sales calls in the next 2 weeks. I'm at least going to be on them. I'm going to hopefully towards the tail end of that.
You're not going to be selling, you're going to be listening.
I'm hoping I will end up taking somewhere between 5 to 10 of those towards the tail end of that, where I'm actually the one selling
Okay.
as the new head of marketing.
All right. Good for you.
Now the sales team can help pick who those are, because by all means, like, let's not have me bomb something that's like, could be that $50 million contract. But even then, like, I've been in companies where $50 million is nothing for what that new sales could be. But things fundamentally change from a conversation perspective when someone in the sales or revenue generation team is hearing me say the same words that they were saying. The bias we have in our own heads, that outside salesperson could have said the same script that I did, and they will think it was awesome. And I say the exact same words, and they're like, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. Why would you ever say that to somebody? And I put up transcripts where it's almost the exact same. And they go, oh my gosh, something is wrong with how we're connecting.
Okay.
And they didn't hear it until they actually heard it come out of a non-salesperson's mouth. And so we're going to do that, but we're going to start that content creation day one, because it is that I want to have content out there that's going to start changing the perceptions. But I want the sales team to start having new tools day one or day 15, if possible, that they can start putting in front of customers, or the customer success team can do the same thing. And we can start to, at that point, start to track how the conversation is changing. That's the other thing. In addition to Google search impressions and brand awareness things, especially if I'm trying to change a category, which sometimes happens from you're on a burning ship. I'm wanting to be able to track terms that are not brand terms, but I'm wanting to see, are people starting to search for this new term, this new conversation, or in the large language models, phrases and questions that they were not asking before. And I want to see if that's starting to grow over time. And I need that to start happening within the first 30 days.
Back to your sales, your 50 sales calls. Impressive, sir. What are you looking for in these sales calls?
A couple of things. So a lot of it is emotions, and the emotions that come up either because we're not bringing up fear that we should be. And I'm a strong believer in that we should be selling with fear in a lot of our customer settings. It may not be overt, but it needs to be, it's in our customer's mind. It may even be in the customer's mind of, if I don't hit my revenue target, or if I don't solve this, I'm going to be fired. That's an okay thing to trigger. But I'm looking for, are there fear-based things that I'm either hearing coming back from the person, or from a facial expressions perspective that I'm seeing change in people? I'm wanting to see follow-up questions back, and I want to see if we have a script either from the marketing or the sales perspective. And I think that like those really should be the same script in most places, but that is curious in a way that is causing our prospect to self-identify, are they a good prospect?
Mhm.
Most salespeople come in there and instead what they end up doing is they're trying to sell and they're not really trying to qualify. I mean, they may be asking qualifying questions, but they're asking those questions in like, hey, it's a really bad date, and I want to see if you're going to be a good spouse. I have 7 questions that you're going to ask, and it just changes the frame. Like, if you have a good product that solves a real problem, and it doesn't solve a problem for everybody, you should have a perception and a script that says, I might not sell to you, either from a company or from an individual salesperson's perspective. And so I'm wanting to step in and say, do we already have this figured out from a marketing and a sales perspective? Or should we be changing how we approach that so that it's bringing up the person saying, this is why I think I should be using your product?
Yeah. There's tools that record these conversations, of course, and actually analyze them. Is it okay in your mind to just be looking at 50 of these, or do you actually want to be on a live call?
You have to be on the call. I was one of 5 coaches at something called Flashpoint at Georgia Tech, where we brought probably like 80 companies through it at that point, with a professor who came up a new way to innovate companies. And he was like, look, you can listen in on calls, and that's hugely valuable. And especially you can do that at scale, and AI makes it a lot better. But we watched a company that was further ahead than Nextdoor by far at the time. Nextdoor is a massive company. And they completely went sideways and changed because they outsourced their conversations with customers and just were the founders were listening to transcripts and reading the transcripts because they weren't on. There's a nuance that you get from not just asking questions, but watching somebody ask questions, watching those faces and hearing the pauses that happen that you just cannot get either from a pure written transcript or from any sort of AI or even like just audio listening to it. And you need to have more than one person on the call as well. It's like you and I could be really, we found this at Flashpoint with Georgia Tech. You and I could be on co-founders. We could both be equally as skilled at having the conversation, but I could not take in the notes and watch the feedback nearly as well
Okay.
as if you were just listening in and vice versa. Like you can only do one of those roles at the same time.
It's a really interesting point, and you've added a new to do to my next company here. So I appreciate that. Let's wrap up the blueprint. What else?
So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to scrutinize the customer success metrics or support if they're doing it that way, because I really want to know 2 things. I want to know what, and AI makes this a lot easier. I want to know what questions are being asked and not just the surface level questions, but I want to know the meaning below the questions that are being asked. So, and I want to know what all that is, and I want to data dump. And AI is so much better at this. I want to take the last 5 years of your Zendesk stuff, and I want to dump it into AI, and I want to have that process. The next thing I want to look at, how many of those things continue to come back up from the same customers, or how many times the same customers come back. I say that because too many companies, especially in the private equity space, they bring in somebody to lead customer success or customer support, and one of the KPIs that they're tracking to, and so this is where I get outside of my marketing lane, is the speed of ticket close. And at the end of the day,
Mhm.
that is horrible for you're not trying to close tickets. You should be trying to make sure that the customers are happy. And so, one, I would just want to surface that, but I need to know, does the customer keep coming back 5 different times with different ways of rephrasing this issue that they're having? And it could be an onboarding issue, it could be a product issue. It could have also been that my marketing team set up a bad perception early on in the sales
Okay.
process that caused a problem later. Either way, we have to know that you have a process that keeps bringing the customer back with the same issue. And here's what that issue actually is so that we can first identify now, why is that perception there? If it's 1 or 2 customers that are having that issue, maybe it doesn't matter. If it's a large percentage, it's a critical issue that we need to solve in the first 30 days. We need to at least identify who's causing this problem. And if it's my team, that's fine. If it's sales, selling stuff we don't have, like whatever the problem is, we have to know what that is. And that's the contribution bit so that we can all not care about who's getting blamed or who's getting credit in the case of the solution, but we acknowledge the problem and go, how can we solve this throughout all of our individual teams?
That's another interesting one. Focusing on customer metrics and not just new prospect metrics. So I like that. Anything else?
When you take that approach, it fundamentally changes how you write content, how you do social media, the conversations you have with sales. Does sales start to trust you? Does products trust you? Even in a company where there tends to be this tension between sales is selling stuff we don't have, or product is not building stuff.
No, that doesn't happen.
It breaks it apart when you start to go, look, I'm the head of marketing. At the end of the day, I can't build the product, but it's my job to make sure that we all agree on what the perception of our customers actually is and who is and is not actually using different parts of our product. And I don't care if you all are mad at me, but I'm going to make sure that we're all in vehement agreement and solve it. And the solution may be us writing content, and maybe that content is us sitting down with sales. It might also mean, gosh, what we need to do is we need to be sitting down with the individual product managers, and they're our main sources for things. And it's not just then in that case, if you take this approach as the head of marketing, I may do something that nobody actually does. I will take it on my responsibility, this is easy to do with AI now. And I will do something that most product teams don't do well. They will explain to the engineers why what they're writing in actually, from a code perspective, actually matters. And as opposed to just the product manager saying, "Here's the test to check," and when you're done, agile, it moves through and you're on to the next thing. When you start to tell the engineers what's actually going on and what they're actually solving, they start to ask better questions of the product team. That's one of the next things that I'm going to do is, as part of identifying where this problem is, I'm going to make sure that even the individual engineer, I will do this within an organization. I want the engineer, my social media manager, the head of sales. I want the controller in the company, all of them to be able to say, what is the name of the budget that our customer is paying for our product or service out of? If the engineer has no idea of that, I guarantee they're not writing code. Like, they don't need to be able to go close the deal, but they need to be able to know this is coming out of a marketing budget. It's coming out of something they're trying to do here within their funnel. And this is how we're solving that. If they get the actual naming that's wrong. And so I'm going to actually come and kind of force that up front. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to really go back and look at, I find too many B2B brands are either over indexing or under indexing on social media and video content. I say that of either they've done nothing. Maybe they set up a YouTube account years ago, and that's a problem. Or they're spending way too much investment on social media and posting stuff that's of interest to the brand for the brand to look, but our customers don't care about
You're
it.
not getting any engagement.
They're not getting any engagement. They're not putting out stuff that's meaningful. They're posting about like, what's the next holiday? And it's like,
Yeah.
like,
Who cares?
who cares? And so usually I find actually B2B brands, they set up stuff that actually wasn't good enough for passing a vetting test, and they're nowhere near towards building stuff. I'm going to start from the approach that says, as a B2B brand, we're going to start acting as a media empire unto ourselves. We don't need to all be Gary Vaynerchuk, but we need to be producing content that is of interest to our customers. And it's not self-interest for our company's perspective, but it's in their interest. And I'm going to produce content that's usually long form video content that I can then repurpose into all of these other content. At which point social media actually becomes much more interesting at that point for our customers.
Yeah. Agree totally. Well, Kurt, thank you for being on High Intent. You've given everybody some great food to thought, especially the sales calls and the customer metrics. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.